Alan Taub was a partner from day one, so I just want to take a minute to introduce him as he takes the stage. So as you've heard, Alan is the director of the EV Center, as well as a professor of material science and engineering and mechanical engineering. Before we were lucky enough to bring Alan to campus, thank you, Peter, for doing that when you were with us. He spent decades in the automotive industry and elsewhere. So most recently, before coming to U of M, was the vice president for global R&D at General Motors, leading their advanced technical work, 7 science labs worldwide, and several global science offices, including 3 collaborative labs here at the University of Michigan, which is where I got to know Alan for the first time. Before GM, he was 15 years at R&D at GE, with 25 patents and 8 years at Ford Motor Company. So a really great career on the industry side of things. Alan's also a member of the National Academy of Engineering and has served on several advisory boards, MIT, Northwestern, UC Berkeley, perhaps institutions that you've heard of beyond the University of Michigan. And he has a PhD in applied physics from Harvard. So under his leadership, the EVC, I would say, hopefully all of you agree, has become the nation's leading hub for electric vehicle research, workforce development, and industry collaboration. And is backed by a strategic investment by the state of Michigan. And a specific thank you to the state of Michigan for the investment that has really made all of this possible. So with that, please join me in welcoming Alan Taub.
Thank you for, an overwhelming introduction, but I didn't want Mike to leave. I've always thought of myself as a reasonable, good academic with business background and thinking big. The history of the Electric Vehicle Center, though, is originally Greg Less, who leads our battery lab. Many of you are users and know him. And I went to the state because we wanted to upgrade the battery lab. Greg had said 10 million. No, we'll go ask for $12 million. And we were having discussions with MEDC. And I remember getting a call from Mike. 12, we're going to the legislature and asking for 130. I need 5 slides. And so I don't think we'd be here today without you, Mike. So
thank you.
And thank you for the extra funds, right? So what I want to do this morning in kicking this off is we just finished our 3rd year as the Electric Vehicle Center. And some of you are new to being exposed to us. Our company members are here. But I know some of you are hearing about the EVC for the first time. And I thought probably the best way to do our updates is look at our 3-year history. So we were granted, it was in April of 2023, the Lieutenant Governor came here and we were given the first half of our check, which by the way, we got the second half recently and are fully funded. And the university also kicked in another 20 million. And this happened extremely quickly. It wasn't like other centers and institutes I and others at university have been involved with, where you're preparing a proposal 18 months before the award, going into a heavy competition, and you're basically waiting to be set off. This was 12 million had become 130. What are we going to do? And the state actually asked LEO, Labor and Economic Opportunity, to be the distributor of the funds. If you look at the charter of LEO, it's about supporting industry growth and job growth in Michigan. And so what we did right at the beginning was establish a few of our leaders, and I'll be pointing them out a little later, just how we're going to pull this off. But the first thing we picked about 8 companies just to get started, spanning from the OEMs to the tier 1s, and said, I have this grant from the state. Part of the grant is to improve our facilities at the university, but we're really giving you this money to help companies get through the transition from internal combustion engine to BEV. And so what we did is myself and a few others, we went off, met at the companies, and those that were willing, we spent half a day with them. And what could we do for you on both the workforce side and the technology side? On the technology side, the key technical areas where we looked at what are the gaps you have in getting through this transition, and which are the ones that we as a university could help you achieve, and the same thing on workforce and education. And so at that point, we had our general charter of where to go, and it was time to declare that we existed. It was intriguing. University of Michigan has been working with companies working on vehicle electrification and other aspects, whether it's self-driving, connected, for decades. But here we were at the beginning of launching a major initiative. And I think it was public policy folks, I don't know if Sean Hammond's here, gets us on a panel in Detroit. And we're announcing who we are, we're having various discussions. At the end of the panel, for those of you who do this kind of stuff, you sort of have your prepared remarks, and you'll see all of the other speakers today going off script, but sort of having the message they plan to do. Then the panel ends, so you sort of empty your head like you do after an exam for the students here. Oh, we have one more question. What are your closing remarks? This is in downtown Detroit. So it came up to me, I said, it's time to rebrand Detroit as the e-motor city. Over the course of my career, I've given lots of talks to the point where I became comfortable doing it. It was intriguing, and I'm not asking for that here. It was the first time I ever got a standing ovation. And so that has been our vision, is to make Michigan, and by the way, you can interpret it as Detroit, you can interpret it as the state, you could interpret it as University of Michigan, just not as Michigan State. Sorry for those of you. Can we get the US not only retain its leadership in mobility and the state of Michigan, which relies on the automotive industry success, can we lead in the transition to electrification? And that's what we've been trying to do. So like any new organization, particularly at university working with industry, the first thing you have to do is deal with the lawyers. And I do have to compliment our back office, whether it was the college administration or the university administration, getting through the laborious task of establishing our membership agreement. And if you look at the number of companies we now have on board, we were able to negotiate an intellectual property agreement that is very favorable for the companies. And in fact, the university said, don't do it on any other centers. And so we got through that. And also, remember, we had started this with a $12 million request to upgrade our battery pilot line. And so went ahead, leased a temporary site where our new building was being considered, and ordered our new equipment. It's then time to get moving on our projects. And what I would like to point out is we had set this up not as, by the way, these are very successful, what I would call a typical university industry consortium, in which the companies are called in, asked for what's important. The faculty would go off and do some really creative work, get some new results. A year later, the industry folks would come back and we'd show them what we did. we were given the state funding to help the companies get through the transition. So we took it the next step, which is on every one of our projects, we must have at least 3 companies working on it, not just telling us what to do, but doing the work. And we also set up so it could be commercialized through them. And that seemed to be working. So we got through our first session, and it started with the onboard components for the vehicle, the motors, the batteries, thermal management. And like any other organization, we had to get the companies driving us. So we engaged them. We had our first advisory committee meeting. And at that committee meeting, we got approval to launch the projects that came out of the industry academic workshop. The other thing is, we really have not a window dressing, a true education and workforce activity. For those of you that own EVs, I saw a lot. I know they're more durable. I know they're more reliable. Have you ever had to take one in for a minor repair at a dealer? We are so short of technicians that can allowed to work on an EV. We have to get the grid moving. We need new engineers. We need new that. And so our education workforce program has been quite active, and we established what we call a battery boot camp. Originally, we brought in community college faculty, get them at the point where they could teach what's required. We've done it with high schools, et cetera, and so very active there. And we were now getting enough done. It was time to start communicating outside. By the way, if you have not become an affiliate of the Electric Vehicle Center, Jamie Ratcliffe, our communications director, is a master at not sending too much information, but just enough. You know, we're on LinkedIn, we're in other places, and anybody can come in for free, become an affiliate. If you're a company, let's have a separate discussion, and I'm glad to do that. It's really a way to be aware of our monthly webinars, what we call our surge centers, and it's an important outlet for us to tell you what's going on, not just within the EV Center, but the electric vehicle world broadly. The other thing is we were starting to get results from our projects. And I always like to point this out. It was led by Greg Keolian at the university. He's been a renowned expert in life cycle analysis for a long, since the 90s when I started to interact with him at Ford. We did a study which looked at the CO2 impact of the conversion from internal combustion to electric vehicle. We did it for the various versions of vehicles, from hybrids to plug-ins to ICE, and looked at it for different vehicle types. And the real critical thing, looked at what it meant to plug into, by the county level, every county in the US. And clearly we have some parts of the grid that are more CO2 intensive than others. And the key output of the study that said, no matter where you are in the United States, no matter what vehicle you're in, all the way from a pickup down to a B-size car, your CO2 emissions, total emissions life cycle, is lower than that of an ICE. By the way, I also think it's important to recognize, in part of our new messaging, and I was part of what I think in retrospect was a mistake. We branded EVs as vehicles that are better for the environment. The reality is it's a better vehicle. Lower dominant structure, better ride and handling, more design flexibility. That happens to be good for the environment. And I think you're seeing that rebranding going on. But this study showed, despite some of the rhetoric that's out there, you are doing the right thing for CO2 emissions while purchasing and experiencing a better mobility option. The great thing is we're now a year later, and our new battery lab is fully operational, and we had our first symposium a year ago. So I'm judging by the limited number of empty seats that most of you are still engaged with us and commenting, so thank you. And we're now past what I call the norming and forming stage into the more fun part of this, which is getting results on the projects. And so we're really launched pretty intensively our collaborative industry academic part of the portfolio and said, you know what, we are the University of Michigan. Most of our corporate members are the leaders in the industry, the Fortune 500, if not the Fortune 50 players. And so we really should have part of our portfolio doing more of the exploratory and startup work. So we launched our first seed fund, and particularly for our academic members, you want to stay till the end, where we're going to announce round 2 of seed funds. But I think it was also important not just to look at how we support the large companies, but the University of Michigan has transformed into an entrepreneurial engine. Competitive right now with the East and West Coast. So we thought it important to do that. There's an existing program called the M-Track to launch new startups from the university. Instead of inventing our own, we decided to provide additional funding to the M-Track program. The first set of projects are launched, and the second call is out now. So, and by the way, this is the one program that goes beyond the University of Michigan. We've funded M-Track programs now at various universities around the state. And I will tell you, I have done buildings inside companies. I helped lead the team that did the new MRS, Materials Research Society headquarters, about 2 decades ago. It's intriguing to do a building at a university. And I'm not saying anything about U of M in particular. I've talked to my colleagues at other ones. The fantastic news is we're approved. And actually, the bids came in within budget, with some budget to spare, which is what you always like to have. Contractors are on site, and by fall 2027, and definitely at 2 years from now when we have our symposium, you'll be able to tour the new building. So the one thing I always like to go back to is our core. Our core is we have had a battery pilot line used by industry 98% of the time. We also have a less automated battery, everything from coin cells to small pouches and cylindrical, that the faculty use together with industry. The great news is our new facility, larger, both cylindrical and pouch, larger format, and the ability to weld those cells into module is operational. And I can't emphasize the fact that we've doubled our capacity. And despite the fact that when we just had the one at our existing site, it was overbooked, we haven't quite filled both. So if any of you are interested in having a place where you can make automotive format cells, and particularly if you're a small company or an academic and you try to walk into an OEM with just coin cell data, I think my colleagues who I used to work with would say, that's interesting. Come back with an automotive format. We can make them, we can cycle them, and unusual is we do have some openings in the coming 2 quarters. So, as we're finishing year 3 of our 5-year grant, we started to look at, what have we accomplished? But more importantly, and in fact, just had our industry advisory committee yesterday and brought forward to them okay, 2 more years, do we say we're done? Or do we go into EVC 2.0? And the answer was, well, you better not disappear on us. This is working. Build on everything you've accomplished. And so the one thing I'm most proud of having done here, I've led many teams over my career. I will tell you, the faculty, the staff of the Electric Vehicle Center are probably the strongest, most proactive, most dedicated team I've ever worked with. I'm not going to introduce you all, but if you would stand, those of you that are in the room, and I can't see if anybody's doing it. I think the rest of the team is still helping people register, but try to catch up with them. I get to take a lot of credit for what we're doing. It's not me, it's them. So, as we're talking about what we're going to be after the state grant, we got enough money from the state to get going, to build momentum, to do results. What we've been discussing is, what are we going to look like when we're at that next stage? And by the way, we're starting to make that transition now. Number one, we're going to have our new building. The building, if you're familiar with the University of Michigan, we call it Mobility at Michigan, is an addition to the Transportation Research Building, Institute building at U of M. So we're now co-located with UMTRI, with M-City, with M-Air, really pulling together all of the research going on in mobility. We intend to expand our portfolio, and I'll talk about that later today, and definitely move. Again, if you are not following us, it's worth doing. I just watch our LinkedIn membership grow and the followers. It's easy to do. These webinars are really very intriguing. We do them monthly. And if you've missed them, they're on YouTube. You can get to them through our website. You can go directly to YouTube. And it's a way to keep going. So now let me shift from the center to kick off the symposium. The electric vehicle industry is at an interesting point right now. And you saw what John McElroy said yesterday. If you don't follow this much, over 90% of people who own an electric vehicle will say, I am never going back to a non-EV, right? I personally don't miss going to the gas station. I remember when I had my first car, which was the Chevy Bolt. After 12 months, I realized I hadn't done anything. Hadn't done a single thing except driven it, other than learning how to not squeal my tires every time I left a red light, because the acceleration is there, and I'm Bondurant trained. So, had to learn how to not burn my tires out after the first 6 months. There's a lot of political noise around EVs, particularly in the US. I will tell you is, if you ignore the rhetoric, new models are still being done in the US. And Jamie pulled this together. If you're interested in buying an EV, these are vehicles you can buy today. That's a large option set, and it's growing. We are in a global marketplace. I think John talked yesterday about what's going on in other countries, particularly China. Recent announcements that we are taking a look at is, number one, profitable battery companies. And I know those of us in the field are actively trying to figure out if this ultra-fast charge, low-cost battery announced by BYD meets all the criteria. The technology is moving. The industry is moving. And these are the announced new models. So despite some of the rhetoric, we are making the transition from hype to now customer-driven penetration. And I think that's what we're going to hear a lot about today.